Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to the Sensitive Stability BPD live show. I'm your host, Kevin Reynolds. For those of you who don't know me, I am a BPD survivor and a BPD coach. Each morning, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. US EST, we go live on TikTok and talk about a different topic related to borderline personality disorder. So today I was thinking, I might talk a little bit about what it's actually like to have BPD. There's a lot of manifestations of this condition. And by that, I mean a lot of different structures of which are common to see present. Some of us will go through life in phases and we will experience different manifestations throughout these phases, right? So we might be a quiet BPD individual for a few years. Then something may happen. You may graduate into a more explosive BPD. At some points, you might have a little bit more of the impulsivities and reckless side. At other stages, it might become more internal. So you can kind of evolve a little bit. The BPD can evolve as you grow throughout your years. Okay. And I myself have gone through so many different phases with this condition. It's ridiculous. It's one of the reasons, in fact, that it was so hard to get diagnosed, to figure out what was wrong. It's because, it changes. It changes so dramatically. If I'm honest and I look back at my life, it all started very, very early. I could see warning signs when I was as early as 2, 3, 4 years old. Nobody would ever know that back then, of course. But when I look back, it's clear to me. As I moved into my early years, adolescent years, I could see how it manifested for me then. I was a serious people pleaser. I would be starting clubs, building forts, running businesses so I could spend money on other people, those kinds of things. That was really important to me because I needed to fit in, right? As I'd get into high school, middle school, and high school, it was more of a quiet BPD. I got bullied a whole lot. And you notice how the difference in the circumstances of your life sort of change how it manifests. And this makes sense. So for some of you who say, well, it's like it's not there when I'm not in a relationship, that's a life change that changes how the BPD manifests. If you've ever noticed that it's different between relationships, there's reasons for that too. And as life changes around you and your interests change, the BPD changes to fit in with it. For example, in my early 20s, I became, 21, was able to gamble. And I was doing very, very well for myself at the time. And I would gamble. I gamble a ton. I'd lose all this money playing all these different games, whether it be in Vegas or Atlantic City. I would drive out to Indian reservations just to go gamble. It was really bad. That's also when the alcoholism started to kick in. As you get a little older, you start realizing, hey, I can't punch holes in the wall anymore. Makes me look like an idiot. So you stop punching holes in the wall. Maybe you start turning that harm onto yourself. Some of us have the harm to ourselves earlier in life during high school. It's like there's phases as to how this manifests. I once heard somebody say, well, this is a common thing, but I remember very vividly the first time I heard somebody say BPD goes away as you get older. That's not true. I mean, maybe a couple people get lucky like that, but most people don't. It just changes how it manifests. The suffering doesn't stop. Your perspectives on the world might change a little bit, but in general, you're still hurting inside. You're still suffering. All it does is it evolves with your circumstances. There's plenty of people who say, well, I was doing great for like a decade, but then I got into a relationship and all of a sudden, boom, it's back. And when it comes back, I mean, it often feels like it comes out of nowhere. So getting rid of it permanently means actually going through the work to reach the perspective changes necessary to ensure that it won't come back. If you're just counting on the fact that, oh, well, I got out of this relationship, I guess I'm good now. you'll be pretty surprised in the future, and it will hit you like that. It'll hit you like a ton of bricks out of nowhere. That's just how it works. The condition is not easy to live with. It makes every single relationship with every other person strained. And that goes for your romantic relationships, but it also goes for your friendships, your relationships with your coworkers and your peers and your supervisors or subordinates. It goes for everything actually, and it starts ingraining itself into your everyday thinking to the point where the most mundane routine tasks become very difficult to accomplish. When I'll give you an example. When I got my first car and I was driving to and from school at that point, every day when I would get close to the school, I would turn the music on to whatever it was that I thought the popular people liked. Thank you, Jill. Good morning. And I would do that because I was embarrassed of who I was. I didn't really know who I was, and I was trying to form an identity based on everybody else's perception of what cool was. Most teenagers do stuff like that. But I'm willing to bet that most teenagers don't tune it to the same exact song and, pull up in certain ways to make sure that people see them the right way. And then, struggle to get out of your car, how you might look getting out of your car, struggle with how you're carrying your backpack, how you're walking into the school, struggle with, eye contact and, who you're going to walk by, who you're going to talk to. High school was a living hell for me, with this condition. And I got bullied the whole time. Like the whole time I got bullied. And I desperately was trying to avoid the bullying by satisfying the people who were bullying me. I would find myself in situations where I was doing their homework in exchange for, them not being so tough on me, basically, was the arrangement. That was a regular thing. That happened quite often. I would be doing things that I was a relatively good kid in high school, up until the end. The end, I kind of had enough. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate everything you do for us. And before I became rebellious at the end there, because I really changed my entire personality at the end. Trying to, I was friends with the nerds, and I loved it. I loved all my friends. Amit was one of my friends in high school, and Amit, you and I were nerds, in case you didn't know. But we were the best kind of people. But we got picked on and we got, harassed and we got bullied and ostracized. And somehow I wasn't okay with the fact that that was happening. I mean, I nowadays I look back and I'm like, who cares what all these other people think? But it was very important for some reason at the time, even though the best friends I've ever had, were back at that cafeteria middle school table, that's the truth. You don't think that way though, when you're getting pushed around, and bullying is something that goes along with having BPD often. Oftentimes we do get bullied, and that creates, a tougher puffer fish, because we're kind of like a puffer fish. Once we hit adult, late teen years, adult life, when we're hypersensitive at that point, and it's because we've been criticized and judged and felt to be not good enough our entire lives, usually as children. Very invalidating experience. Oftentimes we're lacking some parental figure, usually a father figure, but to some extent they're not there. It makes it very hard to learn how to cope and deal with the entire rest of your adult life. And I hate that that's how it is, because it's like the kids are innocent, You're innocent when you're a kid. So to have an experience that then has such a ability to manipulate the entire rest of your adult life is an insane thought to me. It's like signing, it would be no different than me coming to a kid in high school and say, or, middle school, and saying, or even earlier, you're going to be a brick mason when you grow up. And it doesn't matter what you think about that. You have no choice. That's going to be your adult life. You're going to have to go through life being a brick mason, whether you like it or not. I can look at another kid and say the same thing. We'll make him a mailman. You're going to deliver mail all the time for the rest of your life. Now, there's nothing wrong with either of these jobs, just like there's nothing wrong with being an emotional person or an empath. But you're kind of pigeonholed when you have BPD to almost have to be forced to do a whole life of career, a whole life of experience of this condition that you didn't ask for, that you certainly don't want, you know? And the rest of the world, they all know there's something up. You can't hide it. You think you can. And I thought I could for a long time. I lived my life trying to hide it. I lived my life trying to cover up for myself, blaming every other person anytime I had an outburst. Well, that's because this guy did this, and that's because this person did that. I lost so many friends. It's crazy because of this condition. And some of them would tell you, this is why I'm not going to talk to you anymore. And of course, I'm worried about that all the time, and that was my biggest fear, was that I was going to lose people. That's usually our biggest fear. It's the fear of abandonment, the fear of rejection. So I spent all this time trying to build up these relationships by doing over the top things for all these people in my life, the whole time worried that they're going to leave. And then half the time they would, if not more. Some of them would say, I'm leaving because of your behavior. Other people, like you probably remember Tommy Emmett. I was really good friends with Tommy, and he just ghosted. He just flat out just stopped responding to me one day. Never replied to me after that. And then you have other friends like, you probably remember Chase, who would tell me, who said to me with his own, words, he said, the last thing he said to me was, Kevin, you know what it is? It's that you think I never do anything for you. And I was pissed when I heard it because in my head, I'm thinking, I was like 22 at the time or something like that, maybe 21 even. And I was thinking, man, I do everything for you. Like, what is your problem? But he's right. It was like, I didn't see the value of friendship or love or commitment or loyalty or camaraderie. I didn't see those things as markers of love. Instead, I saw the things I was doing, and only the things that I was doing, as a symbol of proper love. And that would be what I'm doing for you. I come help you fix your car. I loaned you some money. I picked you up when you couldn't drive, all those kinds of things, right? I thought that was the gauge of care and affection and love. And it's how it is. Until you realize the truth that love is not measured like that in real terms, that is your BPD filter, your BPD mind misconstruing relationships in your life and what they mean. Until you connect all the dots on that, you will suffer worrying about people leaving. That's how that works. And it's a tough thing to get over, but I believe you can. You just have to change your perspective. Aaron says, how do you help a family member realize these patterns? Well, that's a tough one. If I'm guessing, Aaron, that your family member is in denial then, because if they admit that they have BPD, it's fairly easy for us to tell them that I think this is one of the BPD patterns, because honestly, we don't want to be responsible for the stuff that we're doing. So it's actually easier for us to say, oh, it's the BPD. That's right. That is what's happening here. I need to work on that. You know what I mean? If they're in total denial, if they don't accept it, if they don't believe it, I think your biggest play is not engaging with anything that's inappropriate. If they are being inappropriate, if they're insulting you, threatening you, if they're, erratic, throwing things around, destruction of property, any of that kind of stuff, that's when you disengage. And you could disengage nicely to try and make it a little more comfortable for them. You do that without sacrificing dignity by lowering the emotional weight of the words that are coming out of their mouth, because you know that they don't mean it. That is the BPD sickness side coming out. Okay. That's what that is. That's why the next day we want you back so bad. You're not going to leave, right? You're going to stay forever. It's because we never wanted you to leave. We just wanted you to understand how we were feeling. And we have no idea that we're hurting you in that process, generally speaking. Even when we say, oh, I said that because I wanted to show you how much pain I was in, it's not clicking in our minds that that equates to you feeling pain. So lower the emotional weight of the words that are coming out of their mouth in that moment. That way you maintain your dignity and say something like, I love you. I understand that you're frustrated. I'll never get what you're going through. I'm going to give you some time to think and process, and I'm going to go over here. I'll check in on you later. And that's it. Episodes require audiences. That's how it works. And they do because it is the expression to the outside world of the pain that we are in. That's why the episode happens, so that other people can see how hard it is for us. When you leave the room and you do so in a nice way, they might throw a little bit more of a temper tantrum, but you can't control them. You can't control them. And then you mark on the calendar, Saturday had an episode. Next Saturday, you might notice there's another episode. You're probably going to see patterns like that are undeniable. Once you have enough of letting them get on the center stage by themselves and not engaging, that's how you open their eyes when they are in complete denial. You don't engage in the crazy behavior, and you allow them to just be the crazy one by themselves on the stage. And it's going to be tough. It'll be tough because some of the threats and some of the risks are absolutely real. But you know what's a bigger risk, in my opinion? Doing absolutely nothing and letting them happen forever. Just doing the same thing you always do and not challenging your person. I hated getting challenged. You know, when Carolyn stopped engaging with me when I was having a fit, I was upset about that. I was, but it forced me to see that she was withdrawing and detaching. It forced me to see that I would lose this person if I didn't straighten this behavior out. It made me change my perspective about what I was doing. I still had the rest of the episode that night, but the next day I'm thinking something's not right. Something's different, you know? And that's the thing. The next day when they come back and they're telling you all these things, you know, I'll never do it again, blah, 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 and all this bullshit, you know, which I did all the time. You can't engage with that inappropriate validation at that point and say, oh, it's all right, babe. I know you didn't mean, I know you're a good person. You know, you're not so bad. And like, and just pump that person up the next day. That's unacceptable. And one of the things we have to realize as people with BPD is that this isn't as scary as you think it is. For those of you listening who are struggling with this, you're thinking, well, dude, what are you doing? Getting rid of our support system? No, I'm helping them be a better support system. If you want them to stay, then you have to stop the episodes, and you can't stop it if every time you do something wrong, overreact, you then have your partner guilted into pumping you back up. You know, let's just cut it real simple here. It'd be like me walking up to Amit and punching him in the face. And then I look at him and I'm like, oh God, I'm such a bad person, dude. I'm so terrible. I mean, you're not going to be friends with me anymore. And like, there's no way I could ever get better. And my life is so terrible. And I got beat when I was younger. And that's why I punched you, you know, and before you know it, Amit's like, it's okay, friend. And Amit's such a good guy. He'd do that probably. But I don't know. The thing I'm saying here is it's inappropriate for our behavior to be rewarded with that type of response afterwards. And that is the brilliant BPD mind. We don't like the word manipulation because it has such a negative connotation, but we have this ability to like take a terrible situation and somehow like manipulate all the moving pieces and components really well to where then the rest of the world is helping us and comforting us. But we're the violator, you know, we're the perpetrator in the scenario when we are expelling that degree of anger and outburst. And I think life is hard enough on the general person, on the neurotypical individual. It's hard enough in general. When you're with somebody who has BPD, everyday normal life becomes just as hard as it is for the BPD person. That's something else I didn't know. I didn't realize that all the people in my life were suffering right along with me. Now, it's a different type of suffering, but it's the same degree of suffering, same severity, okay? I did not know that. Bruce says, how do you handle emotional dysregulation? What are some of the ways to control it? Well, emotional dysregulation, the inability for you to keep your head about you, even when things are terrible. The answer is awareness and keeping up with what's inside what I call the emotional tank. You have to know how close you are to 100%, because when you hit 100%, that's when it explodes. That's when the episodes happen. That's when the splits happen. That's when I call it the consequence zone. And it always falls on the people who are closest to you, including yourself. You will destroy your entire life as well as other people's, but you have to be cognizant as to what's in there as it builds. What I usually say is the second you notice a negative emotion of any kind, I feel anxiety, depression, embarrassed, angry, apathetic, doesn't matter what it is. You have to say, well, okay, if 100% is where I have my episodes, how much of this anxiety is in the tank? Is it at 20% and I still have an 80% buffer? Am I close to 100 already? Where am I? And it might be composed of a few things. You might have 20% anxiety and 40% anger. I always say go for the easiest one first. Alleviate that fast, the fastest one you can. So you go for the anxiety. You have to dig deeper than that and say, well, why do I feel anxious? Why? And you'll come up with a reason, and the reason will be total bullshit. It'll be like, well, I have to go to a party and I don't like being in a room full of tons of people. Well, that's not the real reason you're anxious. You're actually worried about judgment, being judged. And if you dive a little deeper than that, you'll realize that you're feeling not good enough, because if you felt good enough, you wouldn't be worried about the judgment and you wouldn't care about the people, right? So then you say, well, how do I solve the not good enough in this scenario? You have to walk yourself through each of the things. You have to start with the emotion, figure out how much it is. By the time you realize that everybody else in the room is probably worried about judgment too, and this is why, and nobody really cares. Let me rephrase that. Everybody is quite selfish. Okay, they're far more selfish than you think they are. And as you start walking yourself through how Rob, the guy that you might be most afraid to talk to there, has his own mental state and his own worries and his own problems. And, you start realizing that from his perspective, he's probably not thinking about you at all. And he's probably worried about this, that, or whatever. Before you get to the end of it, you've noticed that the anxiety has diminished. It's kind of a stupid example because honestly, it's not a direct problem with a direct person. And that one's a little bit harder to walk yourself around, but you could do it. Usually I'll find myself having emotions that I tie to specific people. I'm upset about, the thing that this person said to me, and I felt disrespected. And I felt disrespected, because the last time this happened, or the first time this happened when I was a kid and I was in the car and my father yelled at me, over blah, blah, blah. And like, I could walk through the first time I felt disrespected and realize that it's just an old neural pathway. Then I walk through what the other person's thinking. What did they mean? Why did they say what they said? What was their intention? And they probably didn't intend on disrespecting me. Even if they did, I could still have empathy for why they probably felt that way. By the time I'm done thinking about their perspective, I don't feel the disrespect. I don't feel the anger anymore. Charlotte 22 says, if they only act like they are like that when they drink, is that BPD? Well, drinking exacerbates BPD. Alcohol exacerbates the symptoms. It makes it worse. I was a terrible alcoholic. The reason being, we have low opioid levels. We will turn to any type of thing that will change our attitude about life, and we will become addicted to it, right? So sometimes that's unsafe, unprotected intimacy, promiscuous behavior. Sometimes it's reckless driving. Sometimes it's gambling. Sometimes it's spending sprees. Sometimes it's, SH, when we turn harm onto ourselves. Other times it's arguing with our partners, which produces adrenaline. And sometimes it's substances, of which produce dopamine. So that dopamine will temporarily make us feel normal. We eventually get to a place where we can't function unless we are under the influence of something. I remember how that was. And the alcohol will always make it worse. It will never make it better. But the alcohol is not the problem. Let's be clear about that. The alcohol is the inappropriate solution to the problem. It's going to make everything worse for sure. but it is a solution that we have chosen because we don't have any other tools in the toolbox. That one's a very easy one. It's available everywhere. It's socially accepted, not a big deal, pretty fairly cheap and affordable to obtain. And honestly, we think we can hide it easily, but people know. And that's something else I want everybody to understand is having this condition. You think that you can hide some of this behavior. You think you could hide behind phrases like, I'll never do it again, I promise. But you know deep down that you're going to do it again. It's because nothing changes if nothing changes. That's why. If you took the time to learn a couple skills to try and diffuse some things, that would make life easier. But even that's not going to make the suffering go away. You have to understand why a neurotypical person does what they do. You have to understand why throwing a plate and breaking it against the wall is not going to make you heard. You have to understand how the world looks at you when you're smashing your cell phone every time you get upset. You have to look at these things. You have to acknowledge them. You have to take in the full awareness of all this kind of stuff. And if you don't, then you don't stand any chance at fixing it. The reason that we overlook a lot of our own behavior and justify it and make up excuses, whatever it may be, is because we're afraid of losing control. These behaviors are put in place to control our environment and curate our world. If we strip ourselves of that skill, you know, and we don't have the episodes anymore, well, how is anybody ever going to know how much I'm hurting? And how am I ever going to get that support and attention and affection that I need, which typically comes after the episode? There are ways. And once you learn that there are ways, you'll stop doing the inappropriate stuff because the other ways are much better. You get to keep your reputation, your rapport, your self-dignity, self-respect. And you don't want to identify as the crazy one as much as you might think. Trust me. The respected one gets far more external validation, and you love life too. Kaylin says, I have BPD, but how do I tell if I'm trauma dumping or explaining, or if I even need to explain? Well, if you're trauma dumping or you're feeling like you're having to explain how you feel to other people, it means that you feel unheard and alone, which is typical for us. We feel alone. It's because other people don't understand. I spent a long time trying to explain to the people in my life what I was going through. I would dump all my trauma on every single person who would listen. And that works when you keep finding new people. But eventually you may notice that the same people hearing it all the time get sick of it, and it doesn't work and it doesn't help and they don't understand. That tactic will never work because the rest of the world cannot experience this without having the condition. They just don't get it and they never will. The better answer is to try and explore why other people don't have the urge to rely on other people for validation. How is it that everyone else feels good about themselves? That's the bigger question you should be looking at is, why do I feel like I have to trauma dump? Like, why is that something I feel like I have to do? You know? And it starts very early in life, usually. Invalidated in childhood means you weren't heard back then. So in your adult life, and also bad things happen, it's easy for us to be dumping this weight on other people and trying to get what we need from the outside world that way. Let's see. Where's that comment I missed from Michael? There we go. Thanks, Amit. How do you deal with the need for constant instant gratification and the lack of patience? Well, here's the thing. There is no instant gratification that comes from the outside world that makes sense or that's permanent. So me going up to my wife and saying, you're never going to leave me, right? You're going to stay. I mean, you're going to stay with me. There's nobody else, right? She can say whatever she wants after that to try and make me feel better, but I'll feel the same way about it 10 minutes later because I don't ever know that she would stay forever. Who would ever know that? I mean, who can say that? I believe it. I want to believe it. That's why I married her. But you see what I'm saying? It's a big, fat question mark. That's what that is. It's an uncertainty. And I'm trying to satisfy it that way. Okay. Or the same type of ideology goes for impulsivities. I feel bad. I'm going to go ahead and do this activity to make myself feel better. And we all know that that activity is bad, whatever it may be, the reckless driving, the impulsivities, whatever. In exchange, we're doing that instead of seeking the long-term validation that we earn. And the earned validation is what you need the most. That's permanent. And that's not something, even if sometimes the outside world is acknowledging and giving it to you. Like when my wife comes up a couple times a year and says, Kevin, thank you so much for being a great provider and taking good care of me. That is earned. I earned that validation. So, and it's okay that it comes from her. It's okay that it's a sensei that gives you a black belt. He's validating you, but you earned it in this circumstance. You see, you didn't beg for attention, and the instant gratification side, trying to avoid it can only happen by having a plan that develops the long term gratification. And I think that it's not necessarily so tough to avoid it. You could lace a little bit in. I get validation every time I go and play soccer. That's pretty instant. I mean, honestly, I have to earn it, but it's pretty instant. Not, and over the course of time, I'm still becoming somebody who consistently plays soccer and has friends and develops teammates and, gets joy and stays fit and all that. But I'm also getting instant gratification from doing the right thing in that circumstance too. Every chapter I write in my book, I mean, my book is hard. It's very tough to write this. There's a lot in there. I'm trying to write every single thing that I know about this condition in this book. It's taken forever, but every chapter I get done, I feel good still. That's pretty instant. Took me no time at all, maybe like a few hours to write this, sub chapter or whatever. And I feel good and I know I did the right thing. That's pretty instant. But I also am working on a long-term goal of getting the book done altogether. I think that when you say, how do you avoid the instant gratification? A lot of times I think you should look at it from the perspective of, is this cheap dopamine? Is that what this is? Like the substances, cheap dopamine. That's going to make you feel better for a few minutes and then you're going to feel crappy again. Or trying to fish for compliments from your partner. That's going to make you feel better for a few minutes, but then you're going to feel right back to how you were before, So you have to have the awareness of understanding what's cheap dopamine, what's superficial validation, and what's real validation, and what's going to last. Amit and I have been friends since we've been like 10 years old. That's extremely validating. But I could also make a new friend who likes me just fine, and I like them. And all it takes is a healthy conversation with another human being. And that's also validation. It's not going to be as validating as when we hit the 20, 30-year mark, like Amit and I are about to. That's more validating. But, you got to measure things, and you have to have, the idea of, is this a inappropriate dopamine source that's temporary or not? Sarah says, is it possible to have a real relationship for a person with BPD? Gotcha. Yes, you could have a real relationship. I mean, before remission, you can have a real relationship. I've had several real relationships, and I've had several loves, right? Love can be felt and it can be real. I think that we inappropriately measure how other people love us, which is a big part of the problem. And we also inappropriately measure how to love other people, but the love and the connections can be real. The relationships can most certainly be real. Definitely, both before and after, remission. So Paperclip, love that name. Excuse me. Why does it feel like asking for attention when you tell them your story? Because you tell the story stuck in victim mode. You see, I will tell you right now, here's my story, right? And I'll say it in a nutshell. My father wasn't around much. He was too busy, alcohol, smoking weed, that kind of thing. And I ended up in a really bad spot when I was 6, where I got taken advantage of by a neighbor for a few hours. Then I got bullied throughout high school and middle school. And then I had tumultuous relationships, really bad first marriage, ended up finding a wonderful person who stuck by my side and really helped me hammer out some of these last details after working really hard on myself for about 12 years. And now I have a great life. Now that sounds different than how I would have told it before remission. I'd say, well, I've had a really bad life. I mean, my dad wasn't around. He didn't teach me any of the things I should have learned. I got bullied and picked on all throughout school. I had a really bad incident with a neighbor when I was 6, and nobody really likes me. I lose all my friends. Everybody leaves. I lose all the jobs that I get. And, life feels so hopeless and apathetic. And I don't even want to get out of bed some days. And there's no point, right? What's the point? Well, that's a different story. And it's not just because I got out of the condition. It's because you're in victim mode when you're in the condition. You're in victim mode when you're in the condition. And we don't like to be told that we're victims because it kind of pulls the curtain up on what's going on here. The victimhood is a control tactic. It's a defense mechanism. It's a survival technique that you learned. You started out as a victim and you learned how to play those cards. Those are the cards you got. Those are the cards. And you learn how to play the victim cards. And then those are the only ones you draw after that until you decide that you want a different outcome in life and that ultimately being a victim is not helping you. It's actually hurting you long term, right? And it's the long term that matters here because being a victim actually works most of the time. There are plenty of people. There's always somebody who will listen if you look hard enough. That's always how it's going to be. That said, I think that's the biggest perspective change that was necessary in order for me to get out of this. I had to say, I'm no longer going to be a victim no matter what. Even if I feel like one, even if my wife says something that's clearly wrong, or, in my mind, somebody has disrespected me or betrayed me, I am not going to be a victim in this scenario. I'm just going to look at it and accept whatever accountability I have and then focus really hard on the solution, not on the problem. I'm going to focus really hard on the outcome I want. What outcome do I want? And how often did I even ask myself that? The answer is not that often. I'd be bitching and complaining and screaming and yelling and shouting and, trying to get this person or that person to see my perspective and so that I could be right and they could be wrong. And then I don't know, at no point did I stop and say, is what you're doing right now going to get you what you want? Is it? Like, is this little outburst you're having going to actually lead you down a road where you get what you want? If I would have asked myself that question, obviously I would say, well, no, it probably isn't. I'd still be pissed off and I'd probably be yelling at myself saying, why would you ask that question? Like it's so tough to find other coping mechanisms when you've been doing the same thing for 30 years or so, you start doing it for decades. That's a hard habit to beat. It really is. And other people telling you why you acting like this, that's not going to help you stop. Because what they should be saying is, why don't you try a different way to get what you want? And nobody ever said that to me. Instead, they just said, you can't act this way. Oh, you're going to lose this person if you keep acting this way. Yeah, well, this is why you're never going to get better. It's going to stay the same. Nobody ever presented the concept that I might be able to get the things I want out of life, like know that I have a loyal relationship that I feel good and secure in, Nobody told me that I could feel secure in my relationship by choosing to trust, for example, and that trust is a choice. Like, nobody explained these things to me. I had to learn them the hard way. I had to learn them the hard way by forcing myself to interact with the world like I saw acceptable to the world. I had to say, I'm going to worry less about what they think about me. And instead, I'm going to look at this and say, well, what behavior is appropriate here? Everybody else does it. Most people are operating in social norm, and most people seem to be getting some of what they want, if not all of it. And I seem to be getting none of what I want. and I'm trying so super hard to get it. And I had to analyze my behavior and compare it to the people that were doing well and say, what behavior can I extract from them and then practice, even though I'm terrified of it. I would be terrified of the idea, back before remission of my wife going on a work trip in another state. Like, that would terrify the living hell out of me. And the first time I had to say to myself, you're going to have to trust, you're going to have to make the choice. Like all these other husbands and wives who are going on this trip, you're going to have to choose to trust this person. Yeah, I mean, she could turn her location on. What good is that? I still wouldn't know. They're all staying at the same hotel, right? She could shoot a video before she goes to sleep. I wouldn't know. Dude could be coming in afterwards. She could call me, pretend to be tired. I mean, and then she could be downstairs at the bar. How the hell would you know? You don't know, and you can't ever know. And when you try so hard to figure it all out, you just look like a controlling psychopath. And then you're unsupportive, and then you're an asshole, and then nobody wants you around, and then they really do start hiding things from you. And that's the last thing you want, is for them not to feel comfortable telling you stuff. But listen to me, guys. If you have BPD and you are in a relationship, your partners do not feel comfortable telling you everything. I don't care how much they say, yeah, I'm not hiding anything. In their head, they're like, I can't tell you half the shit on my mind. Literally. And we did that. We did that. It's not on purpose. It was the only thing you know how to do. But we did that. And the only way to give you the happiness and security in the relationship that you want is to know that they have a voice and they can always come to you and say, this is what I'm thinking. And that comes with the caveat here is that you're going to have to hear the stuff you don't like too. Not everything that comes out of Carolyn's mouth, I'm just overjoyed and glad to hear. There are times when she says something that hurts my feelings or upsets me, but thank God she could do that. Thank God she could say that. And thank God it's not like in the beginning when she couldn't tell me stuff. I mean, I think it was about 2 to 3 years after I was in total, complete remission. I hadn't had a single episode, a single split, single symptom, and it took 2 to 3 years. And then she comes up to me and says, I just realized I feel like I could tell you everything now, like anything. And I'm thinking, that's weird. Like, I haven't misbehaved in years. It took her that long to reset. That's how many eggshells she was walking on around me in the beginning. Okay. I did that first year. It's like I trained her for the next 3 years, even though I was better. It was insane to hear that. Very eye-opening. Cassiel says, hopefully I pronounced that right. You're right, bro. I got to take a step back and breathe before allowing it to take over. Yeah, well, it's easier said than done, obviously, because I remember what it was like. But I started analyzing my past behavior and saying it never got me what I wanted. There's a difference here between reaction and response, and everybody just thinks that it's time. I say to somebody, what's the difference between reacting and having a response to something? And everybody always says, well, you take time to think about it. Well, that word think is really important. It's doing work in between. It's having empathy for even your worst enemy. Somebody stabs me in the back. I think very long and hard about that scenario. I imagine being them. I say, why would this person want to do this? Like, what would make sense about hurting me? Why would they do that? I tried to do this and I was just helping and somehow this happened, like why? And you start breaking it down. And this is how you dismantle the emotions in the tank too. You start analyzing other people's intentions because intent matters. Intent matters. You have somebody who consciously hurts another person. We'll say unalives this person, right? A wife unalives her husband in the middle of the night and it was planned. And then you have another wife who accidentally unalived her husband in the middle of the night. Both go to jail. And then the next morning, the one that did it by accident gets released. Both of them ended up in the same outcome with the person, no longer around. Their husband's gone, right? But the person who didn't mean it gets off, right? The person who meant it and planned it goes to jail forever. It's because intent matters. but both of them did the same thing somehow. Let's say, they both even passed the same way. It's because the intentions matter. And when you get wronged and you have BPD, it's like you overlook intention, and you all of a sudden, all that massive empathy that you had before, even for that person probably, you overlook that too. Now no longer do you care about their scenario at all. Just because they did something that you viewed as negative towards you. But two wrongs don't make a right. Somebody's eventually got to drop the hot potato that is blame, of which to create a better world. And I'm not saying that you take your dignity and flush it down the toilet either. That's not what I'm saying here. If somebody wrongs you and it's bad enough, you might not want to be friends with that person anymore. But I have found that revenge, retaliation, vengefulness, you know, vindication, none of this stuff matters. It's a huge waste of time and light. It wastes so much time and energy. Your life is short. We are all here for a blip in time. I mean, it is embarrassingly short for how big our egos are, for how much you think that you matter. The universe is huge, is enormous, and you are a tiny little speck that's here for a blip. That's it. And you want to waste hours and days and weeks and months pouting and whining and complaining about so and so who did this to you 7 months ago. I mean, shit. Like, for real. And who cares? There's a million other blips right around you. Go make friends with them. As Keanu Reeves says, if somebody does me wrong, I mean, if they really do, if you really were wronged, because, sometimes we can't let go, right? He says, I say thank you. Thank you for showing me that you're not worth my time. I'm now going to spend my time with the 7 billion other people on the planet who might be worth something. And that's the thing. They might not either. Life is a journey, and sometimes people come with you and sometimes they leave. I mean, they come and they go. Chapters change and people are in it, and sometimes they're not, and sometimes they come back. You don't have control over the rest of the world. You don't have control over other people. That's not something within your control. Okay? So there's no point in trying to control it. You might even be very good at it. Like I said earlier, our BPD mind is very, very intelligent. It's brilliant, and it does brilliant things in the background without you even knowing it's happening. It will totally curate a world where you can actually lock somebody down for 20, 30 years, but it will be hell for everybody if this is the only skill you have, is to lock them down this way. That's one of the reasons my ex-wife, towards the end of our relationship, she wanted to become a famous Instagram model. Really, it would stress the hell out of me. She'd be going off to all these, random dudes' houses, doing photo shoots. I mean, just a BPD person's nightmare. And I'm at home, like, shaking like this the whole time, like freaking out. And of course, staying, but I drove her to that. I drove her to that position. I curated a world where I was controlling her so much. And I did it in a way where I mean, it was arguable. It wasn't controlling and it wasn't happening. Like, in the moment, it was totally control. But I was so good at it that I was able to, like, keep her in that position for 10 years. 10 years, that's a long time to lock somebody down like that, through manipulation. And it was miserable for both of us. And then just wasted a lot of time. I could have come to terms with myself a lot earlier than that, but I was too scared. And I was too scared. And I don't know why I was so scared of it, because I look back in time and I'm like, well, my life was total hell. I don't know how much worse it could have possibly been by trying something different. And I wish I would have had that kind of attitude about it earlier, because I probably would have had some of my friends still that I lost. I probably would have had more respect for myself. I would have had better reputation. People wouldn't have called me all these names like loose cannon and irresponsible and unreliable and unpredictable and hothead. I thought that, God, I mean, I was so reckless and so impulsive. and so strangely the best person to connect with, but also so hard to connect to. And of course, I was getting nothing out of it. I was getting nothing out of the outside world and the people in it. It wasn't until I really dove into how other people are behaving. I had to really analyze the neurotypical world and say, I remember sitting on the couch one day and I was sitting there with my ex brother-in-law. Well, he was my brother-in-law at the time. And he's like going through some really bad times. He had a serious medical thing happen and like he was at the hospital for 2 years straight, no joke. And he finally gets out of the hospital. He loses his girlfriend, loses his house, loses everything. Then he couldn't pay his health insurance because he went to the hospital. So because he missed the first payment, they canceled it, right? So he owes like $500,000 to this hospital when he gets out. Then he tries to file bankruptcy and they decline it and they tell him, we think you could pay this back in your lifetime. I'm like, what in the hell? Like, what is going on here? And he's telling me all this terrible stuff, but he's happy and he's sitting there playing a video game or something. And I look at him and I'm just thinking like, how are you doing this? Like, if it were me, I'd be freaking out right now. And I remember him saying, yeah, I just don't care. It doesn't matter. I'm thinking, and I had another friend like that too. Dan's like that, Amit. And, they say the same thing. Yeah, I just don't care, whatever, it doesn't matter. And I always wondered how they did that. And then I analyzed it and I realized it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter. They can't take what he doesn't have. It's like, I would never break things down enough to be able to do it like everyone else was doing it. I would just be so worried about how I look to the outside world, how I'm a loser or a failure. And of course, this would happen to me. I deserve this. And I'd identify as the victim. This makes sense. This makes sense, right? It's a tough world when you have this condition. That's for sure. Um, that said, I've been watching you guys in here, and I know that a lot of you, I've been trying to hit some of these topics as I see them passing because it's a lot to pin. If we miss your comments, if we miss your questions, it's not on purpose. I run my mouth a lot, as you can tell. Amit tries his best to keep up and pin some of these things as he can. Please email me. We definitely do want to answer your questions. There's an email button in my profile to make it easy. Tell me your story. Tell me what's going on, and I'll give you the best guidance that I can. I do personally respond to all my emails. Also, tomorrow's show it'll be Friday. On Fridays, we focus more primarily on the questions. So if you want to get more of your questions out and answered, where we do a better job of trying to stick into the chat, and figure out what you guys need answered. That's kind of like our free question answer day. And that's every Friday. For those of you who can't attend every day or miss an episode, we post them on YouTube. You can find a link to that in my link tree in my profile as well. It's like a week behind or so. I think we are right now, something like that, or a few days behind. So you might not get like today's episode right away, but there's a bunch of episodes on there, and Amit does a very good job of labeling them very clearly. So you got to look and cherry pick topics that might be interesting to you or things that, maybe are more relevant to you. I appreciate everybody who shows up every day and, provides all the extra support to the chat, to the new people who show up. Thank you very much. Manny says, hey man, thanks for all your advice and support. You're very welcome. I like being here, and I love trying to help as much as I can with this because I know that there's very little actual help out there for this condition. It is frustrating. It's very frustrating, to say the least. That's an understatement. I was doing everything trying to get better. And that's another thing, living with this condition. You go from like no awareness to denial, usually, to, okay, I might have this, but I can fix it myself. And then the next phase is, okay, I guess I need help, but you do it for the wrong reasons. You'll go see the therapist or the doctor or me or whatever, because you're afraid of losing the relationship. And then you realize, oh shit, there is no help unless you were lucky enough to fall here. I'm very good at this. I'm very good at getting people out of this. It's because I know exactly what it is you have to do. I have the roadmap because I walked it myself. That's the difference. But if you were like me, I wasn't around back then. I saw my first couple therapists and did it for the wrong reason. Then I started doing it for the right reason. I'm like, okay, I really need to beat this. And then I said, uh-oh, there's nobody out there. This guy doesn't know. This woman doesn't know. This medicine doesn't work. This program didn't work. This book is bullshit. Like I went through everything I could, and I was getting desperate, and finally I had to really just turn around and fight the demons like head on, even though it was scary as hell. And I didn't have any, I had support like from my wife, for example. I had support from her, but I had nobody who understood, who could go through it with me. So each thing I had to do was absolutely, totally terrifying. I mean, every piece of it was completely, totally terrifying. But every time I did it, I got rewarded. And that's what I want you to understand. When you do the things that you need to do that are scary to get better, to get through this, you get rewarded on the other side. You get rewarded. And that's the part that I didn't understand before. Nobody said to me, they would say, why are you acting this way? What they wouldn't say was, hey, how about we act a different way and try and get the same result? I mean, a better result, right? We get what you want. How about we try a different route to get what you want? Instead, they just looked at my bad behavior and said, and kind of ostracized me for it. They demonized me for it. They looked at me like a monster. And then that was a catch-22. You get trapped in a loop where you might as well start identifying as the monster. What the hell's the point? And that's how I ended up in all the rebellious kind of behaviors and the reckless behaviors and, becoming a tough person. That's, when I say tough, I really mean just I started identifying with the undesirable characteristics. My family would call me a black sheep my whole life. And then I just finally accepted it. I was like, all right, I guess I'm the black sheep. Well, the black sheep doesn't care about themselves and they act this way. And what the hell's the point? And I don't care what you think about me anymore. Deep down, I really do. But I'm putting on this hard external shell. Like I'm so tough. I don't care at all what you think anymore. And it's like, I became this undesirable person and I lost a lot more friends and just life became even harder. It's very tough to get out of this, but you got to start realizing that, not knowing who you are doesn't mean that you aren't someone. And if you really dig deep, you can figure out the kind of person you are. And I know it's somebody good. Little Gypsy says awareness of how you respond to how you react, feeling what your body's doing, and when you're reacting. Yeah, that kind of stuff matters. Having awareness to some of the physiological aspects of this condition are important. But normally when I would notice my palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy, mom's spaghetti. Sorry. When I notice that kind of stuff, it's already in a place where, in the past anyway, where the episodes are kind of happening, which is fine. At any moment that you can come to awareness of your behavior, at any moment at all, that is the moment that you have control of changing the outcome. That is where you can intervene. And a lot of the times that you notice that there's negative emotion. Pay attention to the first negative emotion in the day and dispel it. Don't carry it. Don't throw it in your backpack and keep walking up this arduous, treacherous trail. Instead, sit down and take time to unpack it and realize what happened, where it came from, and what the intentions were of those around you. That said, this morning, we're coming to an end. Our lives are Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. US EST. If you miss them, don't forget they're posted on YouTube. I'm happy everybody could make it this morning. I'm happy that I can make it this morning. Life's been pretty hectic and I've had to skip a couple here and there and I don't like it, but it's what has to happen. So I'm grateful every time that I can show up and be here with you all. Definitely tune in again tomorrow. You're very welcome, Travis. Glad you guys are all here. Tune in tomorrow, 7 a.m. US EST for our question answer period. And you guys can ask whatever you want. There's no topic, anything. It's all free game. So this would be a good time for you to get some real answers. and figure out how you can set yourself on a better track. Because I believe you can. I believe anybody who shows up to something like this, you care enough, and I know you can do it. I believe in you. I'll see you tomorrow, 7 a.m. USCST. Have a good day, guys.